It was 10 years late. It was completely abandoned by its own architect halfway through construction. What was supposed to be a triumph of modern engineering quickly unraveled into an epic project management failure.
The final cost eclipsed original estimates by a staggering 1,357%. By all conventional metrics of time and budget, the construction was an unmitigated disaster.
Welcome back to Learning with Pratik. If you're new here, this is where we break down the world's most fascinating stories, trends, and systems, making the complex incredibly simple. In today's explainer, we are answering one fascinating question. How exactly did a textbook management failure transform into a revered global icon?
Part 1. The Beautiful Disaster. A chronological journey begins in the late 1950s. The New South Wales government ambitiously sought a new centre for the performing arts on Bennelong Point, which is this stunning location jutting right out into Sydney Harbour. But political urgency quickly collided with reality. The Premier insisted on breaking ground before the structural designs were even finished. Now, when engineers actually got to work, they made a grim discovery. The site wasn't solid sandstone. It was made of loose alluvial deposits. This meant they were forced to install 700 board piles deep into the earth just to stabilize the foundation, triggering immediate, massive delays and huge cost overruns.
Part 2. The Spherical Solution.
To really understand this building, we have to look into the mind of its Danish architect, Jørn Utzon. Utzon possessed a deep, grounded reverence for the site. He didn't just want to build a hall. He intended to create a dynamic, living sculpture. He once stated, "It is important that such a large, white sculpture in the harbor setting catches and mirrors the sky with all its varied lights." You see, Utzon's early conceptual sketches derived their fluid shapes directly from the clouds rolling over the harbor. Beautiful on paper, sure, but capturing that natural elegance in massive concrete shells proved to be an absolute structural nightmare. For years, the design team struggled with complex parabolas and ellipsoids. But then, Utzon had a brilliant breakthrough. He realized the shells could all be derived from the exact same uniform geometry, a single sphere. This geometric breakthrough was a total game changer. It didn't just make the massive concrete arches structurally viable to build, it also solved another massive headache: how to perfectly place over 1 million Swedish ceramic tiles. Because every curve shared the same spherical geometry, a standard tile pattern could be prefabricated and seamlessly applied across all the shells. That's what gives it that dazzling, light-catching surface Utzon dreamed of.
Part 3. A Management Nightmare.
While the roof design was a triumph of architectural genius, the reality on the ground was spiraling out of control. Because the podium was actively being built while the roof was still just a concept, the structural engineers had to rely on something project managers jokingly call a swag, a scientific wild-ass guess. They literally had to design massive foundations without knowing how much the roof was actually going to weigh. So when the spherical solution was finally defined years later, major parts of the podium had to be completely blown up and reconstructed.
If we look at the timeline, it highlights this inevitable march toward a crisis. Utzon won the design competition in 1957, and premature construction kicked off in 1959. By 1965, the relationship between the architect, the engineers, and a highly critical state government had completely deteriorated. Funding was aggressively withheld. Finally, in 1966, buckling under immense political pressure, Jørn Utzon resigned. He left Australia, leaving a local team to scramble and finish the interiors.
Part 4. The Acoustic Compromise.
That chaotic handover, combined with the sheer cost of the delays, forced some massive structural compromises inside the building itself. The magnificent exterior was essentially hiding a notoriously haphazard interior. And for decades, this created a deeply frustrating reality for musicians. Inside the concert hall, the brass and string sections sounded completely disconnected, almost like they were playing in entirely different rooms. The audio was critically delayed, meaning musicians couldn't even hear each other properly on stage.
Part 5. The Decade of Renewal. But the story of the Opera House is one of continuous evolution. Recently, a 10-year, $300 million initiative was launched to finally fix these deep-seated flaws. For years, the old concert hall relied on these clear acrylic acoustic donuts suspended from the ceiling. They completely failed to unify the acoustics. So, during the renewal, these were ripped out and replaced with 18 semi-gloss magenta fiberglass acoustic pedals. At the same time, they lowered the stage by 400 millimeters. This precise engineering finally achieved what had been missing for decades, unifying the orchestra's sound. And these sweeping technological upgrades went far beyond just the acoustics. They brought in a state-of-the-art theater flying system. They installed automated stage risers so classical musicians could actually hear one another clearly. They also completed a $71 million renewal of the Jones Sutherland Theater. And crucially, they massively enhanced wheelchair accessibility, opening up stunning areas like the Northern Foyer to all patrons for the very first time. They essentially transformed the complex to meet the demands of 21st century artists and audiences.
Part 6. Valuing a National Icon. Which brings us to the ultimate resolution of this entire paradox. How do you judge a project that was such a logistical disaster yet an undeniable architectural triumph? Well, according to a recent report by Deloitte, the social value of the Sydney Opera House has reached a staggering $11.4 billion. To put that into perspective, it proves unequivocally that the intense initial pain of construction, all the delays, and the bitter political infighting were entirely eclipsed by its profound cultural impact.
Today, the building hosts world-class performances without compromise. It contributes roughly $1.2 billion annually to the state economy. But the real takeaway here goes far beyond just architecture and economics. It's a profound lesson in long-term value. Sometimes, a project that fails every single short-term metric of time and budget can still be an overwhelming success if the foundational vision is strong enough. It is no longer just a building, it's a symbol of a nation's identity.
Which leaves us with a lingering, fascinating question. In executing massive civic projects, how do we balance visionary art with practical project management? Can true architectural genius ever adhere to a strict budget and timeline? I invite you to share your thoughts on this down in the comments.
It really does remain the ultimate paradox, a project that defied every rule of conventional management, broke its architect's heart, and yet ultimately gave the world a true architectural masterpiece.